Well, it all concluded at about midnight last night. The Rwanda bill finally has gone through. The game of ping-pong is over. It'll head on for royal assent. It will become law fairly shortly. But literally within hours of that passing, there was a very dramatic, tragic incident that took place just off Wimereux Beach next to Boulogne. And Mark White, GB News' home and security editor, has the full story of the day.
Nigel, good evening. This incident unfolded about 5 a.m. local time when a boat, very overcrowded, was pushed off from the beach. Now, 5 people drowned in that incident. We're told 3 men, a woman and a young girl. We are also told that French investigators now investigating the possibility that a group of migrants from Africa who ran towards that boat, who tried to clamber aboard and force their way onto that boat, may have contributed to this boat being vastly overcrowded. We heard figures of about 112 people on this boat. I've never known, even though the boats have got bigger over the years, Nigel, I've never known them to have 112 people on a single boat. It was clearly in a very precarious position. It had gone off. Apparently it had grounded on a sandbank for a while, then moved off. Some of the migrants fell off into the water, but the boat continued on its way. Remarkably, the French authorities went up, offered, of course, to rescue those who were still on the boat. Half of them refused. About 50 odd did get onto the French boat and were returned to France, but 55 continued on that journey. We got exclusive footage from the middle of the channel showing that boat as it continued on its journey towards UK waters, eventually reaching UK waters where, of course, as is routine now, it was picked up. This time it was by the Dover lifeboat, and those 55 people were taken to Dover Harbour. We also filmed, Nigel, as the police from Kent Constabulary were on the harbour quayside there, waiting for those migrants to get off that boat, and they were very methodically photographing and searching and questioning those coming off that boat, because, as I say, one of the key lines of this investigation now is that a group of African migrants, we believe, ran towards this boat as it was trying to get into the water and forced their way on board. It's a tactic that's become increasingly common.
I'm going to say, Mark, this is not uncommon now, is it? You find the Africans have no money and they try and jump onto these boats that have already been paid for, that are on their way out from the beach. And we saw a stabbing, of course, occur just a couple of weeks ago in very similar circumstances. Mark, I think the thing that really stands out from this incident to me, obviously the sad loss of life. That's now 14 people, I think, that have died that we know of so far in the Channel this year. What really stands out is that massively overcrowded boat getting stuck on a sandbank, which indicates it wasn't one of the more professional gangs, because they would know their tides and know their sandbanks. But what really strikes me is 5 people overboard drown, the French Navy come, take other people off, and still escort that boat. Effectively, the French Navy are working for the traffickers, and they're taking that boat to British waters. At what point politically do we say to the French, you have got to stop acting as agents of the traffickers?
Well, it's a point of huge contention. You're absolutely right. People present this as a new phenomenon that the French are escorting these vessels. But you and I know, having been out there, this has been happening for years. Now, the French say very publicly that the reason that they are doing this is because they do, or they have tried, to persuade migrants to get on board their boat and be returned to France. They've refused, threatened to jump in the water, whatever the particular circumstances of the refusal was. And so the French say, rather than cause an incident in which people could potentially lose their lives, they stand off, they escort the boat until it reaches UK waters when the migrants are happy, because of course then they want to get on a UK Border Force vessel or indeed a British lifeboat at that point. But it is, you're right, very contentious here. Are the French really doing enough to intervene to try to persuade and push these boats back to shore? Well, it's clear that even though this boat was caught up in what was a terrible tragedy, 55 people were still determined to continue that journey to the UK, and they added to the 350 people, at least, who have made it across today in 7 small boats, Nigel.
Mark White, thank you very much indeed for that full report of what happened in the English Channel today. And as Mark says, 350 have crossed today. Wait for Friday. It's Flat Calm Friday. It'll be 500 on Friday, I promise you. All of which makes me wonder, at the £240 million we've spent on Rwanda already, if we do send 200 or 300, it'll be another 100 million plus. We're not going to get very good value for money out of Rwanda, but will it work at all? Well, I'm joined by Ivan Sampson, immigration lawyer and friend of this programme. Ivan, under the legislation, there are now 52,000 people, in theory, that could be sent to Rwanda, albeit Rwanda will only take a couple of hundred for the first few months, maybe up to 8,000 over the course of about 6 months. What was interesting today was the press reporting, obviously stories coming out of the government, that we're going to start detaining people. Where are we going to detain them? How are we going to detain them? And how do we stop them from absconding?
Absolutely. I mean, our prisons are overcrowded. We don't have capacity to such an extent that the courts are releasing prisoners early to make way for new prisoners to come in, who come into the criminal justice system. So that's a question that the government haven't answered. And when they do detain them, then what is the cost of that? To even detain them, there's going to be. Are they going to put them back in hotels? What they didn't want to do in the first place?
But if I'm told that I'm on the list to be sent to Rwanda and I don't fancy the East African sunshine, what's to stop me absconding, just disappearing?
Indeed. What the government have said is they're going to select people who have limited or no rights of appeal in their opinion. So,
in their opinion.
In their opinion. And they've got, supposedly, 250 judges ready to hear any judicial review applications and decide them fairly quickly. So that's what the government's doing in regard to any interim measure applications. But if somebody does make an interim measure application to stop the removal, will the Secretary of State invoke his right under the treaty to ignore that and breach his international law duty?
Well, we've got 2 points here, haven't we? Number one is ECHR, and would we, I mean, as Rishi says, no foreign court will tell us what to do. Well, I think if he defied the European Court of Human Rights, he might find half his cabinet on the edge of resignation, but that's a political point. But the bit that really interests me, Ivan, is that we, with or without the court in Strasbourg, we incorporated the European Convention on Human Rights into British law in the Human Rights Act 1998. And so I've been thinking, well, whatever the government says, people will be able to use, lawyers will be able to use, judges will judge on that Human Rights Act. And yet, in the Rwanda bill, it says that the court should ignore key sections of the Human Rights Act. And I think is that Articles 2 and 3. So explain to us, how does this work? We have an Act of Parliament. Does this Act of Parliament effectively legally countermand the Human Rights Act, or doesn't it? Or is that open to question?
Well, there's a contradiction here, because what they've done is disapplied Section 2 and 3, so the domestic courts can ignore both the decision and any previous case law of the European Court of Human Rights. They can do that. But it's worse than that, because what the government has done is not only said we're not listening to foreign courts, they're not listening to their own Supreme Court. What they're saying is we're going to ignore the Supreme Court ruling, which said this policy is unlawful. We want our MPs to turn a blind eye to that determination of the Supreme Court. Based on what? Now, Lord Hope, and good on him for tabling that amendment late yesterday, because what he said was they should provide reasons as to why they say that Rwanda is safe and have a committee to decide each individual case. That would have delayed things even more for the government. But the government don't have that evidence. All they have is a hunch that is going to work. Now, what if, when Labour get back into power, which is very likely, we have to bring all these people back? What is the cost of that going to be?
Well, the cost of all of it's enormous. But I want to get back to this point. somebody's about to be deported, maybe with very good reason, but a lawyer takes a case to a judge, it then may go to the Supreme Court. Does the Supreme Court rule in favour of the Rwanda Act or the Human Rights Act, or is this something that we can't determine sitting here right now?
It's a lacuna. Human rights is what's called a universality law. That means no government can ignore the rights of individuals to inhumane and degrading treatment. The government have told the Supreme Court they could ignore that, even though they themselves decided that they would be subjected.
But the Supreme Court may not take that.
Well, this is going to be interesting how the Supreme Court judges take that, will decide this, because what the Supreme Court do has to apply the will of Parliament. That is correct. However, there's a lacuna, because they themselves said it's not safe, their own judgment. They've been told to ignore the Human Rights Act, but will they ignore their own judgment? That's going to be interesting.
Wow.
They will have to actually ignore the judgment they made.
This is going to be potentially a massive legal wrangle, isn't it?
Indeed.
Which will go on for months and months and months.
It's a constitutional crisis. That's what it is. And the government's placed us in this position, instead of doing what they should be doing, removing people that are not genuine, deciding applications quickly and fairly, and limiting the number of applications we take every year. And instead of doing that, and also dealing with the French. I heard your comment.
Yeah.
Absolutely right.
It's appalling.
It is absolutely appalling that the French are actually signposting people to the UK.
Oh, 5 dead, that's OK, we'll take the rest of you over. I can't believe that the French Navy did that
And
today.
we're paying them to do that.
A lot of money. This is going to be extraordinary. It all actually leads in to the point, folks, I made last night, that I think the idea that in 10 to 12 weeks' time these planes will be taken off with regularity to Rwanda is for the birds. There are going to be massive, complex and complicated legal and, as Ivan quite rightly points out, constitutional questions that get raised here. And that's why I now think, I'm not 100% certain, but I'm 2/3 certain that he's going to have to call a general election before this gets to the courts. That is my view. I could be right, I could be wrong, but I feel it more strongly than I felt before.